Okay, my name is Danny Zambilovich. I am the publisher of the Comox Valley newspaper, The Island Word. And we're having an interview with Mr. Bob Wells, the mayor of Courtenay. It's January 26th, middle of the afternoon. It's a cloudy day. There's been snow, there's been rain, there's been everything going on. How are you, Mr. Wells?
I'm doing fantastic.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I mean,
Good.
sort of busy as always. It seems to be sort of my modus operandi, but it's going well. I think right now there was a bit of a, I don't want to call it a lull, but really over Christmas, took the opportunity to recharge my batteries a little bit. Was getting, with everything going on, a little bit worn down last year. I'd like many other people, I think. And
how do you recharge? How do you recharge?
Honestly, it's really tried to spend time with the family. And when I, felt like having a nap, just laying down for a nap. I think that's, for me, has been something that's been important throughout my life. I tend to have a fairly busy schedule. And that schedule is, I have a family. That's kind of my first priority. I'm vice president of the Wells Corporation, as it were. And then I, have a company. Running the company, takes some energy. Although, to be fair, my staff have been absolutely amazing this last year, basically running that. But the city, there's many facets to the city. There's lots going on, whether that's housing, whether that's social services, which is kind of new to municipalities. But then you got your roads, your sewer, your water, all those kinds of things as well. So, just being able to take the time and not have to think about things, honestly, was a good thing. Firing up the Xbox, playing some video games, and just getting out with the family, riding bikes and spending time with them.
So what's the schedule like at City Hall? How does your schedule compare to before the virus?
Yeah, sort of night and day. I would say before the virus, I'm a bit of a unique situation as well. My first year as mayor, so it's been just over 2 years now. But within weeks of becoming mayor of the city of Courtenay, I was also elected chair of the regional district, the Comox Valley Regional District. And so those two things, basically, it's like a double mayor, if you will, where I'm sort of mayor of Courtenay, but I'm also mayor of the regional district, and looking after some of those larger projects, those larger things that involve all the municipalities within the Comox Valley. So it was a pretty busy first year, to be fair, and I was pretty, I don't want to say excited, but I had a very specific mandate and target to get done in my first year, basically 2019. At the end of 2019, I was happy. I had said I would only serve 1 year. I was happy to step down and basically had provided a little bit of leadership, a little bit of mentorship to make sure that first year with all the new elected officials got off to the right start. I think that worked out well. And then basically within I would have stepped down end of October, November of 2019. And I was really excited again to recharge my batteries. So I did very much similar as I did this past Christmas holidays, just family time, really tried to relax and do things with the family as much as possible. And then in January, I kind of hit the ground running with getting some knee surgery, as well as being diagnosed with diabetes, which is not the greatest thing in the world. Made me a little bit concerned. And my plan was to, spend a little bit more time on doing exercise and health type stuff. And then basically, I think yesterday was the anniversary, maybe, of our first case of COVID in Canada, within, basically a week or so. But it's basically been 1 year, and getting those reports, it was kind of interesting. It would have been early February, probably the first few days of February. I met with our medical health officer to talk about what was then just referred to as coronavirus. And at that point, it became very clear that we would be facing a pandemic just based on what was happening in other countries. And it was great to have Charmaine Enns, our medical health officer, great doctor, to be there to provide that guidance and sort of kind of the path that we'd be looking at both locally, provincially, and federally. So it'd be somewhat prepared for it. But March 13th, Friday the 13th, 2020, that's when the hammer came down. And I would say, the couple of weeks up to that, I certainly was working a lot with city staff to make sure we were as prepared as possible. We were, looking at what were the plans if we had to shut down public facilities like the Lewis Center, swimming pools, libraries, all those kinds of things. So making sure that we were as prepared as possible, kind of knowing what was coming down the pipe. But of course, it's one of those things where we really were having to wait for the province to take the lead on it. Honestly, I did kind of push to get an emergency operations center, declare a state of emergency in the Comox Valley earlier, or at least in Courtenay. But it doesn't make sense for it just to be Courtenay. It's kind of difficult for it just to be the Comox Valley. State of emergencies up until now have basically been fires, floods, possibly an earthquake, but they tend to be a lot more localized, whereas this one was obviously not just provincial or federal in nature, but worldwide. So, and I would say, when you ask about my schedule, getting back to that, I was probably spending maybe 2 or 3 days at City Hall, and that basically went to well, first of all, staying home for 2 weeks, from the 13th right until the end of March. I just stayed home, not knowing really what was happening. But one of the key messages from our Dr. Bonnie Henry was kind of, only go out if it's essential. And two things that we pivoted on really quickly, both within my company, and this was my staff. They virtualized the company, created a VoIP phone system, ticketing system. We already were doing some remote work, but we basically became full remote support, and really only doing on-site stuff for essential, like medical clinics, those kinds of things, which we continue to do, working with pharmacies, those kinds of things. And then on the city side, again, jumped right into Zoom and phone calls and stuff. And I would say for at least the first month, from sort of mid-March to mid-April, almost every day from 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning until probably 5 or 6 o'clock at night, was just one meeting after the other, and really just making sure that information was flowing, whether that was, first of all, meeting here with my council, meeting with the regional folks, meeting with the provincial folks, and to a lesser extent the federal. So just making sure that we're all following the right protocols, making sure that messaging is getting out, and yeah, it was a pretty hectic month, and we didn't know what we were looking at in terms of a timeline. And so I think that that first month really set us up for success. But last year, honestly, was just crazy busy, just so much stuff going on. One of the things that we did at the city early in March was come up with a business action plan. So this is before the state of emergency. We actually started to talk about where do we want to be 6 months from now or 3 months from now, if there is going to be the shutdown that we are kind of anticipating. So that happened. We kind of came up with some recommendations by the end of March. And so, like I said, we were really trying to make sure that we were as in front of most of the stuff as we could be. And again, that first week after March 13th, one of the first phone calls I made was to the Homelessness Coalition here in the Comox Valley, to Andrea, and to say, look, we know that your funding sources, which by and large were through nonprofit, like organizations, Too Good to Be Through would be a good example, but there's this sort of those revenue streams were going to dry up, and they were going to dry up really quickly. So we sat down with them in that very first week and said, the city has some gaming funds that are somewhat discretionary. We don't have to get provincial authorization to spend them. And so we made sure that we sat down, got the recommendations from them, and then got that money into their hands within days. So basically, they gave us a total that they wanted. I got the authorization from City Council, and the next day they had a check in their hands. So we really tried to respond as quickly as possible, knowing that it was going to take the province a lot longer to get its sausage maker, for the lack of a better term, up and running.
What other areas has the city kind of intervened and actually done something that's had an effect on the ground in terms of the epidemic, or is it more as a question of the municipality coordinating with other governmental groups, has the city taken other initiatives, and is the city responsible for any other aspect of everyday life during the virus? If you know what I mean.
Well, there's certainly a spectrum. Yeah, there's certainly a spectrum. So, I talked about the actual dollars that we put into the hands right away of some of the local organizations, but also working with those organizations and saying, what is the need right now? And so one of the things it's for the people who are living rough out on the streets and in the different tent cities, was a place to go and be able to shower. And so one of the things we're able to do is get the actual showers open for them at the Lewis Center. So they're able to actually go and shower up and stay warm there. So that was one of the things. One of the other things that we had done prior to this was we got the Connect Center open, which is a warming center, again, for people who are homeless or need services. And so we made sure that facility was kept open because that was really just in a trial period. And again, I think there's a bit of a blend happening right now. Again, if you looked 10 years ago, a municipality was really responsible for roads, sewer, water, and parks and recreation. But it was a pretty tight list of things. But I think that there has been a lot of frustration in terms of the provincial and federal governments dealing with mental illness, addiction, homelessness, those kinds of things. So again, the city had already been meandering in that direction and doing some of these very specific things. But I think, again, having showers for people to stay clean is part of that spectrum. Working with the Homelessness Coalition to say, do we need to open up emergency shelter beds? Are there things that we can be doing, again, if not locally, advocating to the provincial government? And as a real kudo to the provincial government is that they started having weekly phone calls where we were talking with the Minister of Municipalities, the Minister of Health, those kinds of things, so we could get information really quickly. And it wasn't the Minister of Municipalities, I got to say, Selena Robinson at the time, the way they set it up was not just that they were feeding us information. We were on the phone with lots of mayors, and in fact, I believe it was all the mayors, possibly on Vancouver Island, the Sunshine Coast kind of area. So we had a lot of mayors, chairs of regional districts, all on these phone calls, listening to the information. But then we all had the opportunity to say, these are the things that are affecting us right now. And that might be homelessness, drug addiction, mental illness, those kinds of more social things, but also on the tourism side, some of these smaller communities who were feeling inundated early into the pandemic because people wanted to go someplace. So, some of these smaller communities that are really tourist hotspots became overwhelmed in a time when we were telling people to only travel for essential purposes and to socially distance, those kinds of things. So I think that the city really tried to respond locally as best we could, and then if there's things that we needed to advocate for at that provincial level, that we continue to do that.
Do you have any personal sense of any special needs that are happening in the city or in the surrounding area, that people in certain areas are being hit hard, impacts on business, impacts on individuals, more homeless, anything like, from your perspective, are you getting information that's suggesting what the situation is like for people that are experiencing special hardships right now?
Well, I think first and foremost, those that are, we certainly had a homeless population. We certainly had folks that were suffering from mental illness and drug addiction. But I would say that, mental illness, depression, stress, those kinds of things have been particularly emphasized over this past, almost year now, where, there are people who have much higher stress levels than they would have. And that could be essential workers, nurses, doctors, people who didn't know they were essential workers, who were working in restaurants or working in other businesses. I mean, my employees didn't know they were essential until, we would get a phone call from a doctor's office or a pharmacy saying, we need this fixed right now. And so, having everybody pivot and really, try to stay safe, it takes a lot of energy. And so I think that's one of the things that we're most concerned about. And then you start looking at even how it's affecting youth. I've got 3 children who love going out, skiing, bicycling, going and playing with their friends. And I would say pre-pandemic, every day we'd have 2 or 3 kids over at our house, that would be visiting our kids, and they would be playing video games or playing in the backyard or riding their bikes. And to have that basically stop and not be able to go to school, schools were closed, that I think had a really big impact on youth and in terms of their ability to just socialize. And again, the different dynamics. You got some families where, maybe both parents can't work. You have other ones where maybe one parent's working, one parent's not, or you have a family maybe where there's no parents, or single families, that those issues become even more exacerbated. So I think that from my perspective is one of the things we wanted to keep an eye on and really push, not just the provincial government, but the federal governments, to make sure that they're supporting businesses properly, that they're supporting people properly, whether that be through like the CERB payments, or the ways for businesses to access funds to keep going. And our company, like I said, is continued because we were providing essential services. But one of the weird rules that the federal government had was you weren't eligible if the business owner was an elected official, which I happen to be. That put my business in a more precarious position because of that. We were able to get that overturned. Our MP Gord Johns went and made that, got that change done for us because it was affecting lots of businesses across the country. And it was really not designed to have the impact that it did. It was really that you don't have a decision maker benefiting themselves. But in the big picture, that's not what was happening. And so, I really feel for companies that had to close just by the nature of the work they were doing. Some of them haven't been able to reopen. Obviously, tourism has been impacted. And that's certainly one of the things that really compelled me to push for the Economic Recovery Task Force. And was really happy to get that started and to look to see what are the things that need to be done, what are the pillars, right? And one of the interesting things that came from the Economic Recovery Task Force is, again, as people might have to go back to work, but there might not be childcare, the kids couldn't go to school. Childcare became this issue that was sort of universal. I mean, if you had kids, that in and of itself may make it impossible for you to go back to work, or very difficult. And so really pushing the provincial government and the federal government to really look at childcare as an essential service not just now, but obviously something to take into the future. And I think that's one of the things, being, I guess, entrepreneurial and optimistic is always looking like, this is not something that anybody would want to have happen, and to be shut down and to have all of these restrictions put on us, both in terms of our movement or our ability to generate revenue. But how do we take this opportunity and come out stronger as a community or as a province or a nation? And I think that's something where things like having better childcare will definitely have something to offer for sure, but also providing technical assistance to businesses. Again, so many businesses, health professionals, everybody kind of turned on a dime, so to speak, last March to virtualize everything. And I feel somewhat sort of lucky that, for years I've been using programs like Zoom, and in fact, back in the 90s, I was doing some of this stuff, live streaming things, and so I just happen to have all the technology around, and I know how to make things work, microphones, wear lighting, like all these little things that can really gum up the work, so to speak, when you have someone that's just not their expertise. But to make sure that the government is able to provide that kind of support. And I think, as a local government, one of the things that we want to do is try to streamline the permitting process, in particular for restaurants to be able to put tables outside. As you can imagine, a restaurant, is built on, like anything, a business model that says we have this many tables, we sell our stuff for this amount of money, we have this many clients, and therefore we're viable or not. And that's in the best world. It's still tough. And then you have COVID come along and say, okay, by the way, you can only have half as many customers at most. And depending on the form and function of your restaurant, it might not even be that much. So, for us to try to do those kinds of things to react as quickly as possible, from a city perspective, that's one of the things where we had our staff come to us and kind of say, what are the ways that we can make things work? We still want things to be safe. We still want to make sure that we're up to building codes, all those kinds of things. But we just want to make sure that these restaurants are able to deploy a lot faster. And again, not knowing how long it was going to last, but again, here we are in January, looking at the 1 year anniversary from the first infection, and that puts us in a again, kind of looking back, we're glad that we did make those changes as early as possible. And I think interestingly, it wasn't COVID, but I can't remember what it was. I'm not sure if the road got washed out or floods or something, but Tofino actually had a shutdown just over a year ago. And I remember seeing a picture of their grocery store, and the produce was like empty, and that really kind of struck that, hey, we need to have that local food security, which is a whole other side of things. I mean, we've got, thousands of acres of land in the Comox Valley that's sitting fallow, that's not being productive. And there's all sorts of economic reasons, social reasons why that's not happening. But, trying to turn our minds to see how do we make that better? How do we take advantage and the opportunity and frankly, the need going forward. And so those are the things, I know it's been a meandering thing, but like from the Economic Recovery Task Force, those were kind of the big focal points. And then, one of the things that we really encouraged, and each member of the Economic Recovery Task Force, each municipality really gets to choose what it wants to do. We talk about things, we make recommendations, but it's really up to every member to see how they'll implement that themselves. But one of the things that we kind of partnered up with was the gift card program, and really encouraging people to buy gift cards for local businesses, so that money gets into their bank account right away, and then creates a system where down the road we can kind of take advantage, or they can as the consumer, we can then go in and say, okay, we're going to use your service or your restaurant, whatever it is, when things are safe.
So the task force is an ongoing project, correct? The economic recovery.
Absolutely.
And so how often do you get together? Or are there the regular meetings?
Yeah, so they're relatively regular meetings, and as I mentioned, a lot of the stuff we'd be meeting potentially every week. Sometimes it was every other week. Sometimes it'd be once a month, just depending on what was happening. And really, kind of going into Christmas, we kind of came out with the local gift card program. We had already come up with sort of the 6 pillars that we wanted to focus on as an economic recovery task force. And so we sort of disseminated that out to the municipalities and said, okay, let's focus on that for right now. And then in the new year, we'll come back and we'll meet. And January has been a very, very busy month. And I mean, as you know, we had a provincial election during the pandemic. And so there's things that have been happening in terms of the provincial side of things. I've been meeting with our Minister of Municipal Affairs, who is now Josie Osborne, the former mayor of Tofino. And so, we've been really busy, again, just trying to make sure there's that alignment, that we're keeping in touch with people. And right now we're going into what I would like to think of as like the next phase. And so we're going to start having some more meetings here in the near future.
Is there any possibility for the members of the general public to get involved?
Well, to be fair, with the Economic Recovery Task Force, it was the member municipalities of the Comox Valley. So we had Cumberland, Comox, and Courtenay. We had the Comox Valley Regional District was part of it. We also had Comox First Nation. We had the military base. So we had lots.
So let's say somebody has a great idea. Let's say somebody has a great idea. How they should contact some other, like the municipality they live in would be get some representative. That's some way of accessing.
That would certainly be a way of doing it now, and I think that might be appropriate at this point. But early on, we actually created a technical advisory committee, and that was made up of all the business sectors, and not just what we consider business sectors, but also the nonprofit sector, daycare, those kinds of things. So we had all these sectors that were being represented. So I wouldn't necessarily say anyone off the street could be part of that, but they could certainly apply to be part of that. And that was done through Comox Valley Economic Development Society. And Dina Simpkin, who is the president of that, she basically became the gatekeeper of who could join that. And again, the mandate was to be as open as possible without necessarily having, because at the same time, we want to listen to all the ideas. But sometimes some people will have an idea that, unfortunately isn't practical. It's not within our power, those kinds of things. And so at that point, people were contacting me directly and still contact me directly. And we're fine with that. We want to make sure that if you've got a good idea, that you're able to reach out, and whether it's as mayor or chair of the Economic Recovery Task Force, I've always had an open door policy. When you email me and I email you back, my cell number is right there. My information's on the city website. I try to make sure that I'm as accessible as possible. And even every week I have time set aside just to meet with the public. And so either that's by phone or by Zoom now, but just making those opportunities as possible. And so, so in terms of how to get that information, those are the ways of doing it. And I love brainstorming. I love really taking an idea and, maybe that idea isn't practical, or maybe it's something we can't do. But sometimes, again, if you don't look at why you can't do it. It's looking at, is there something in there that's worthwhile to pursue? Is there another way to look at this? And that's one of the things that I try to do as much as possible.
Good, great. So somebody can contact you personally, or the Economic Development Society, or their own representative in their own municipality. Those are all options. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the leaders in the Comox Valley are all open to have those conversations with people. I don't want to. I think I put a lot of effort into getting that message out for myself. To be fair, I do spend a lot of time at City Hall, and not every elected official has that capacity to do that. But I do know that all the elected officials that I know of in the Comox Valley are here because they love the Comox Valley, no matter what municipality they're in, and are always generally happy to talk to people to get ideas.
Great. Do you have any information on vaccines and how that's going in terms of our own area? Are we close? Are they on the way?
Well, I mean, in terms of vaccinations, I'm probably not that much further ahead than anybody else. We know that right now there's a production stall that's happening as they ramp up production. So it's kind of one of those necessary slowdowns so that there's a huger impact in the near future. Certainly hearing about people getting vaccinations locally, and I think. I do my best to follow Dr. Henry's advice. In fact, I've got one of her things on my Christmas tree over there that I haven't taken down for my office yet. About being safe and being calm and basically being kind. Right? Those three things I think of. For those that have really tried to focus on it, it's been good. But to be frank, you may have heard about the millionaire that flew up, I think it's to the Yukon, to jump the queue, and that's it's hard not to see, or hard not for that not to really piss me off. People are really working their butt off. People are really sacrificing right now. And so, it's really disheartening when you hear about those kinds of things. And I know there's already a call, like, they got a fine, but I think there's going to be a real big push to see if there can't be jail time for that as well, given the egregious nature of what they did. I mean, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't by accident. This was completely premeditated, fraudulent, disgusting behavior, and you just I'm so inspired every day by all the great things. That's the one thing, and I really try to focus on all the awesome things that are going on. So from a vaccine perspective, the rollout, I think you probably saw, they're going to go essential workers and long-term care facilities. And once they kind of get through that initial hurdle, then they're going to do basically a 5-year ban, starting with seniors and kind of working their way down. So, and again, they're trying to maximize who is going to be impacted if they got infected by COVID. I think that's their logic right now. First, get them vaccinated, and then basically, again, get the essential folks done, and then go down in those age bands and basically be done by September. And right now, I mean, had you said a year ago that the vaccination process would be done by September of this year, the people who were most optimistic a year ago were saying it could be 18 months to 2 years before a vaccine would even be ready. So the fact that we've got a vaccine that, they started the rollout last year at the end of the year, I think that really speaks to the amount of energy and focus that was put into this. Again, I think folks have talked to the luck around. They'd already been doing things with SARS and MERS and other types of things. RNA, was it rDNA, I think, sequencing, all that stuff, came together to allow us to get a vaccine done in less than a year, which I believe is like a quarter or less of amount of time it's taken any time in the history of vaccine creation. So that's really exciting. I do see that it is, unfortunate that we have this slowdown, but really looking to the fact that that's going to allow us to have a much faster rollout. And it's not just, we look here in Canada, we're lucky. We are absolutely lucky. But we have to make sure that these vaccines aren't just in Canada, that other countries, especially those that don't have as much resources as we do, that as the world, as leaders within the world, that the leading countries are helping those other countries that really need help, because travel is not going to stop. And this is the kind of thing where you don't want it to kind of come back and bite us, because we weren't making sure that the entire world was vaccinated against it.
Good point. So let's talk a little bit about housing. So I see the city is exploring the possibility of setting up co-ops. Mm-hmm. So the city is looking at three properties that the city owns, and yeah. What would the involvement of the city be in terms of setting up the co-op or running the co-op, anything like that, long term? Like, yeah. What's the city actually doing? Other than the very important thing of providing properties.
Yeah, and I think the property is certainly one of the things. So as a council, one of the things we wanted to do is have that inventory of what properties that we do have. One of the challenges that we have is many of the properties that the city owns are little corner pieces and slivers and lane ends and stuff that really aren't conducive to anything substantial. So the first thing we did is we engaged with the community land trust out of Vancouver, and basically said, let's inventory and kind of have some metrics to evaluate the properties that we do have. So CLT was able to come in, look at the properties that we have, and basically the BC Co-op Federation as well. They came in to kind of say, okay, if we look at these lands, what is the maximum that we can benefit from it, whether that be residential units, whether that be, say, commercial or community space, all those kinds of things to try to factor in which spaces would be most effective. And that resulted in sort of the three options that we have been we put forward for grant funding. And so really from the city's perspective, it's not just the land that we're providing, but it's also all the effort that's gone in over the last year or so, maybe even longer than that, actually not just to inventory the land, but to engage with the co-op housing community to see, is this a viable option here? Because co-op housing does tend to provide the opportunity for some grant funding, which is great. That lowers the cost for somebody to get involved. But it's also a different structure. Co-op housing, people own their home, so to speak, but they're like a partnership owner. So it's not like they own this one thing. They have to own it as a community. And I think that's one of the things that's really enticing about this, is it is not just about providing some housing, but also in a way that provides some community. And so the long-term, obviously, we're going to be seeing if any of those applications are going to be successful. There was one on Duncan Avenue, one on First Street, and one on Cliff Avenue. First of all, to see, do any of those would they be successful in the province's mind or the CMHC's mind, so that we can move forward with some grant funding. And if they see that it's successful, at that point, we'll actually be doing a lot of engagement with our community. And again, we'll be leaning on CLT and their expertise to help us do that. But that's really where the city's going to be involved. And then down the line, I mean, depending on how things play out, most likely it'll be a long-term lease where the city leases the land to the Community Land Trust. The development gets made, and maybe it's a 99-year lease on that land. The buildings get built, people get to live there. There may be, like I said, business space, community space, depending on really what feedback we get from stakeholders. And then yeah, that's kind of where the city would probably step back at that point once that's all said and done. But the timeline for that is years. I mean, we're talking 3 or 4 years at a minimum, potentially longer depending on other things. We have COVID-19 right now, but there may be other things that come up between now and then.
So the Community Land Trust would be running the project long term, is that correct?
Well, they would be helping set it up and dealing with the purchase and stuff, and then also that BC Federation of Co-op Housing, they'd be really coming and leveraging their expertise on making sure that because co-ops, I mean, they're their own kind of organization, but they'd be brought in to make sure that they're set up for success, and then support them going forward. So I mean, that's kind of where they would be, but really it'd be the co-op that would be running things after that. I mean, it'd be up to the co-op. They'd have their bylaws, they'd have their rules, and that's where that'd go. And I think that's one of the things. And it could be where, let's say all 3 buildings get approved, but then maybe the community only wants to support 1 or 2, or we only have the capacity to do 1 or 2 off the starting line. Each building might be its own co-op. There may be a co-op that's multiple buildings. It's really those kinds of questions that's where we lean on CLT and the Co-op Federation to really give us those examples. And I mean, personally, I'm excited about it. I mean, I've been sort of a serial entrepreneur most of my life, starting in probably before high school, but in high school I certainly had that's when I first started having employees. And then my first sort of legitimate computer company was a co-op, the Silicon Garden Computer Co-op in Salmon Arm. And so I know the co-op model. I've seen co-op housing in action. I know that it works on a variety of levels. So, again, I think, the city, we're here just to encourage the process and to make sure it's successful. And, right now, we're talking, between, I think 40 units or so per site potentially, again, depending on the mix of uses. But right now, I mean, we probably have close to 1,000 units that are coming online within the next few years. So some of those are literally in construction right now. Some of them are in the permitting process. Some of them are just starting conversations with the city. But we have a lot of development going on right now. So, I think the development community has really responded in terms of the need that's here. I mean, the vital signs report that we get every few years, I think it might be a couple of years before we get the next report. But, when it talks about the vacancy rate, which is sometimes close to 0, especially for families, that's where there's lots coming online. And so the co-op housing really is just another tool in the toolbox. There's going to be other options. There's going to be other things going on. We're still going to be working with BC Housing to see what other facilities we can get going. But the fact that within the first year of our since the last election, we've had the Braidwood project open up. We've had the Junction open up. So we've seen some movement there. I would say probably more in the last few years than in decades, really, if not longer. And so it's really about keeping that pressure on. COVID kind of blindsided us a little bit, but it's also shown some of the chinks in the armor, some of the cracks, and so I think there's that willingness with everybody at the table, whether it's local leaders, the nonprofit sector, or even senior levels of government, the province or the federal government, to really work together to address these issues.
So when you said just now there are going to be about 1,000 units coming online soon, is that sort of more high density, more affordable housing? Is that specifically what you're referring to? Is that what
I'm more specifically to higher density, I would say. That's in addition to any single dwelling units, your sort of single detached home that people are probably, yeah. But it's not to say that they're necessarily going to be like when we say affordable or subsidized, they're not necessarily going to be those. Some of them are going to be for sale. Some are going to be rentals. Really, it's just going to be a mix. It's not really up to the city necessarily to tell a developer what the best use for their land is, but we certainly work with them. They know what our strategic priorities are, and I think they've reacted and really stepped up to make sure that they're providing the types of housing that we know that we need here in Courtenay and the Comox Valley. And those 1,000 units that I was speaking of, those higher density apartments and townhomes, those kinds of things, that's just in the city of Courtenay. So,
okay, and so the co-op model, again, to go back to that, so people do have to buy in, right? Like you have to put some money down.
Yeah.
And you're also you own it, and then you're able to sell it.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's and that's where,
but it's not quite market. It's not quite at the market. So how does
exactly?
How does that work?
Well, basically, you buy shares into the housing. So you're not buying necessarily the unit, as it were, but you're buying shares that basically represent your unit, if that makes sense. But then, rather than paying rent or other things, you're basically, as a co-op, you're paying down that mortgage. And then when you decide to leave, you sell your shares to somebody else or back to the co-op, and then the co-op is able to sell those shares to a new member.
Do the shares have some kind of a market value? Do they go up and down in value as a house would?
Yeah, and that's where I really look to the BC Federation of Co-ops to weigh in. They're definitely going to know the intricacies of that a lot better than I do. Sure. But it's certainly it's not market just off the bat, but also just the intricacies of how the mechanics of it, they'd be able to answer that a little bit better, I think.
Great. And so the city's also conducting some kind of a poverty survey or an anti-poverty survey?
Yeah, and that's through the regional district, I believe.
Oh, it's regional district.
But again, we're a member of the regional district, and like I said, I think that's been something that has wide support throughout the Comox Valley. And in fact, one of the first things that I was able to do on the regional district, we first had the non-binding election or vote on funding the homelessness coalition for the Comox Valley, and that was a year in. That would have been back in probably 2019. We were able to actually fund the homelessness coalition, so through the regional district. And so this is kind of continuing down that path. The poverty reduction strategy, just again getting that feedback from people out there of what are the issues and potentially what are some of the solutions. So highly recommend that everybody go in and fill out that survey.
Great, wonderful, well done.